All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. It is a great zchus, Baruch Hashem, to be able to resume our shir. I know it's been a little while that we've been off schedule, so it's nice to try to resume a schedule. There are sheets, if anyone needs, on the bima and on the front table over here. So what we're going to try to do, Emirat Hashem, today, and hopefully in the shiurim ahead as well, is a little bit of a combination of a variety of different things. A little bit of Parsha, a little bit of Tehillim, and just a little bit of life, or maybe a little bit of Parsha, a little bit of Tehillim, and a lot of life. Well, we'll figure out exactly the balance. But I wanted to actually begin today. First, I'll begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Steve and Terry Zinn, in loving memory of Steve's father, Albert Zinn Bunim Tzvi Ben Chaim, on the occasion of his 20th yahrzeit. Our week of learning sponsors, Killian Jillian Goldberger, as a zchus for an easy and successful recovery for their son Aaron after surgery, Aaron Yeshaya Ben Rivka Esther. A day of learning sponsorship, Shmuel and Liba Dinovitz, in the zchus of Refuah Shlema for Aaron Yeshaya Ben Rivka Esther. And a sheer sponsorship for today, Tutu Packer, in memory of her father, Ephraim Fishel Ben Yitzchak, Zichron Lebracha, whose yahrzeit was on Hoshana Rabbah. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all those who needed Refuah Shavon together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, and we should just be Zochei Meretz Hashem to Besoros Tovos for all of Klal Yisrael. So with that, let's begin. I wanted to share with you, actually, I wanted to begin a little bit differently. I came across, actually, on Erev Shabbos, a really beautiful article by Rav Adin Steinsaltz. So Rav Steinsaltz, as you may know, lived from 1937 to 2020. Rav Steinsaltz was really at the forefront. He was a revolutionary in terms of Talmud Torah. So in the days before Art Scroll, right, really again, you might remember they used to have like the old bound red Sensino Gemaras. That was like the first English translation. Then Rav Steinsaltz was really the first to create a modern Hebrew, not translation, but interpretation of the Gemara. And that really opened the door to just a tremendous amount of literature that we have today that really takes Torah, makes it accessible to everyone. Rav Steinsaltz was a Chabad Chassid, but a tremendous, tremendous thinker. Probably one of the greatest scholars of our generation. So he has an essay that I actually came across on Erev Shabbos that I felt was so beautiful and so meaningful and such a different take. And the title of the essay, as you see in number 1, so that's a picture of Rav Steinsaltz. The title of the essay is Inyano Shel Chodesh Cheshvan. What is the meaning, the deeper meaning of the month of Cheshvan? So he writes as follows. We're going to do a couple of pieces. He says, HaChodesh hazeh, excuse me, hu HaChodesh hayichidi she'ein bo shum moed. So of course, as we well know, Cheshvan is unique because it is the only month that does not have a Yom Tiv. There's no Yom Tiv in Chodesh Cheshvan. Hayamishu she'amar she'achodesh hazeh miyuad lebigyan beis hamikdash hashlishi mipnei she'pashat ein bo shum chag acher asarech lasos bo ize chag. This is something amazing. He says, therefore, he is actually quoting the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Lubavitcher Rebbe said that it was clear to him that the third Beis HaMikdash was going to be built in the month of Cheshvan. What's the pshat? He says, because every single month on the calendar had a Yom Tiv. There's only one month that doesn't have a Yom Tiv, and that's the month of Cheshvan. Almost as if Cheshvan itself is waiting for something beautiful and dramatic and incredible to unfold within it. There are sheets right on the bima if you need. So it's such a beautiful idea. He goes on, he says, Chodesh Mar Cheshvan, hu Chodesh Tov L'Davar Echad. Now, interestingly enough, Cheshvan, although it doesn't have Yamim Tovim, Cheshvan does have something positive about it. What's positive about Cheshvan? He says, Mechevet she'ein bo chagim ha'she'ela shenish'eles b'chodesh hazeh eich chozrim l'shigra. So ultimately, again, because there are no Yamim Tovim, so what happens on Chodesh Cheshvan? What is Cheshvan all about? It's a return, ultimately, again, to routine. To routine, right? Again, if you think about it, right, Tishrei, if you think about how to summarize the entirety of Tishrei, what is it? It feels like Yom Tov, Shabbos, Yom Tov, Erev Yom Tov, Shabbos, Erev Shabbos, Yom Tov, second day Yom Tov, first day Yom Tov, Shabbos. There's a whole, and it's beautiful on one hand. On the other hand, it's totally and fundamentally disruptive, right, in a good way, to the normal routine of life. Cheshvan offers us a return to the routine. He says, however, How do we establish proper routine for ourselves in life? So he goes on. At the end of the day, right, the month of Cheshvan, so on one hand, we call it, Cheshvan is often known as Mar Cheshvan. So it's interesting, people assume Mar Cheshvan means bitter Cheshvan, because so it's very possible that the name actually of the month originally was Mar Cheshvan or Marach Shivan. Again, but we often associate the lack of Yomim Tovim on the Yom Tiv to almost be like a certain level of sadness, that there's nothing there. So first of all, we know Rabbi Nachman says, mitzvah gedola lios b'simcha tamid. A Jew has an obligation to always be b'simcha, not just in Tishrei, but in Cheshvan also. So there's no such thing as a month, even Av, even if you think about this, right? What does the Mishnah say about Chodesh Av? Mishenichnas Av, what does the Mishnah say? Mema'atin b'simcha. So when the month of Av comes, we diminish our simcha. It doesn't say we eliminate simcha. It doesn't say we do away with happiness. It says we minimize it. Because one of the most beautiful things in Yiddishkeit is that a Jew is always b'simcha. Our job is always to find simcha, no matter what time of the year, no matter what month, no matter what time of the year. It doesn't make a difference. So this notion of Cheshvan being somehow like a sad month or a bitter month is antithetical to the way that we think. So Rav Steinsaltz points out, so he says, what is the avoda? Ultimately, again, what is the avoda of Cheshvan? And he says, perhaps the avoda of Cheshvan is establishing routine. Now, hold that thought for just a moment. Now let's go to the parsha. Take a look at source number 2. So again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Vayomer Elohim el Avram, Ayira be'einecha al anar v'al ha'masecha, kol asher tomar elecha Sarah shma bekolah, ki b'Yitzchak yikare lecha zara. So this is a very interesting pasuk. So remember again, a little bit of context. Last week's parsha, Avram and Sarah did not have children for a long time. What was the plan of action? Sarah Minu comes to Avram with a plan. What's the plan? Marry Hagar. Now, by the way, it's important to point out, it was not Avram Avinu's idea to take a second wife. Right? Remember, Rabbi Soloveitchik actually points this out. Avram Avinu was wholly and fully committed to Sarah. And if that meant a life with no children, then that was the divine plan. So from Avram Avinu's perspective, he was never ever going to take a second wife. It never came up. It was never a discussion. It was Sarah Imenu who was so dramatically dedicated to the actualization of the Abrahamic dynasty that said to her husband, you need to take another wife. You need to have children. Fine, Avram marries Hagar. Ultimately, they have a son, Yishmael. In this week's parasha, after Yitzchak was born already, Sarah Imenu sees that Yishmael is a toxic personality, and she tells Avram, you need to send Yishmael away. You need to send them away. Okay, so now remember again, so what happens afterwards? Avram Avinu obviously did not, this suggestion did not sit well with him. Because remember again, Avram Avinu is all about bringing people in. Avram Avinu is all about acceptance. Avram Avinu is all about the tent open on all sides. So how could it be that he's going to send his own son away? It didn't make any sense. But yet HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervenes, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you need to send Yishmael away. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to Sarah. But look at the last phrase in number 2. Ki b'Yitzchak yikari l'chazara. Because ultimately, again, Yitzchak Avinu is going to be your future. Yitzchak is your future. Yishmael is your son, and Yishmael will also be the father of a dynasty, but Yishmael is not your future. Yitzchak is your future. And that's a really statement. And in fact, David HaMelech says in Tehillim, if you say, I want to point out something fascinating. Avram appears many times in Tehillim. Yaakov, Yisrael, appears many times in Tehillim. How many times do you think Yitzchak appears in Tehillim? How many times? Take a wild guess. Once. Once in the pasuk you see in number 3. David HaMelech says, this is in chapter 105, Asher karas es Avraham, Ushvuaso li Yitzchak. Yitzchak is Yitzchak. Why it's a sin and not a tzaddik is not our discussion for today. Yitzchak Avinu appears once in all of Sefer Tehillim, which is really quite dramatic. Now, interestingly enough, if you look at the pasuk, so the pasuk that it's talking about over here is that ultimately Hashem made a covenant with Avram and an oath to Yitzchak. Now, it's interesting because we don't find that Hashem made a separate oath to Yitzchak. That's why the Mefarshim, when you take a look at number 4, for example, the Radak explains that Shekras Avram Kimosha Kasov Bayomahu karas Hashem es Avram bris lemor lezaracha nasati. Hashem made a covenant with Avram Avinu. What was the covenant? It's a multi-layered covenant. It's a covenant that he's going to have a great multitude, right? He's going to be the father of a great nation. It's a covenant that we're going to have Eretz Yisrael. The way that Radak understands it is the covenant that Hashem made with Avram Avinu, he swore to Yitzchak that he would uphold. So it's not a different oath that he made to Yitzchak. There was a covenantal arrangement between Avram and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then Hashem swears to Yitzchak, that which I promised your father, I will uphold to you, which is fascinating. Because what do you see from here? There was no separate covenant. You're in the right place. There was no separate covenant, ultimately, again, that was made with Yitzchak Avinu. One covenant, one bris, ultimately made with Avram Avinu, and ultimately, again, a follow-up oath to uphold that covenant to Avram. Now, why is this important? Because David HaMelech is really hitting on a fascinating theme, which is, in general, if I were to ask you, tell me what we know about Yitzchak Avinu, what would you say? What do you know about Yitzchak? What do you know about him? This is the interaction part of the shir, right? Right? What do you know about Yitzchak? Akedah, good, right? In this week's parasha, Avram Avinu is willing to offer up his one and only son. Good. What else do you know about Yitzchak? I'm sorry? The midah of Gevura, although again, I'm talking about biblically, right? Because what do you see in the psukim? What do you know about Yitzchak Avinu? He loved Esav, right? He had a favorite child. Okay, so let's even back it up from the beginning, right? If you think about it, let's go chronologically. Yitzchak Avinu, Akedah, right? That was like the first event. Then afterwards, he gets married, struggle with infertility, okay? After that, children, has a favorite son. After that, he dug wells, and they were filled in by hostile local populace. And number 3, and last one, he relocates because of famine. If you notice something very interesting, who else do we see every single one of those events by? Avram. If you look at Yitzchak Avinu's life, it's almost a carbon copy of his father. Right? Just let's trace this again. Akedah. Well, Akedah, Avram was there also. Ultimately, again, infertility. Avram Avinu and Sarah also dealt with infertility. Favorite son. Avram also had a favorite son. Right? The favorite dynamic, right? Wells that were filled in by local hostile people, Avram Avinu also had that. Relocation because of famine, Avram Avinu also had that. If you notice, and by the way, Yitzchak Avinu's life pretty much again goes from Parshas Vayera through ultimately again Parshas Toldos, right? And that's very little is known about him. And anything we do know about Yitzchak, out of all the avos, right? If you think about it, the patriarch who gets the most amount of coverage in the Torah is Yaakov Avinu, which makes sense because he's also the father of the 12 tribes, right? So Yaakov Avinu really built out this destiny. Avram Avinu, again, a lot, but the least amount of coverage is for Yitzchak Avinu. I just want to point out that what we do know about Yitzchak is pretty much a carbon copy of that which we learned about his father. There's nothing really new in the Yitzchak Avinu narrative, which paints a fascinating picture about the role of Yitzchak. Take a look at source number 5. So Rav Steinsaltz continues on this, and he says something really beautiful. He says, Yitzchak hu be'erech kimo mar Cheshvan. Yitzchak Avinu is a lot like Cheshvan. Now hold on to that thought for just a moment. Yitzchak, by the way, I'm in source 5, the right-hand paragraph, which is the Aleph. The Aleph is just on the left side of the paragraph. Sorry about that. He says, Yitzchak omed ba'achos mibayos hachayim hakashos biyoser. Yitzchak Avinu lives life with a tremendous conundrum, right? A challenge. What's the challenge? Lachshov shahaya li abba mishu shepasach olam chadash va'ani lo ish kazeh ma ani tzarech lasos. Sometimes children who grow up with a famous or influential father have difficulty following in those footsteps. Right? My father was this bigger than life personality. So now, what do I do? What do I do? So Yitzchak Avinu has a father who literally changed the entire trajectory of humanity. He did. Avram Avinu, remember again, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avram Avinu that you're going to be a Av Hamon Goyim, a father of a multitude of nations, that statement, that bracha came true. Avram Avinu is the father of every single major faith, right? Everyone, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, everyone traces themselves back to Avram Avinu. We often claim Avram Avinu as our own, but Avram Avinu was the one who introduced monotheism to the world. So it's not an accident that every single major religion traces itself back to an Abrahamic patriarch. So now Yitzchak comes along. Yitzchak is a very different disposition than his father. Yitzchak is a very different person than his father. He says, Ma'ani tzarech lasos. So what do I do? And by the way, interestingly enough, grandson Yaakov was very much like the Zayda, like Avram Avinu. Yaakov Avinu is a trailblazer. Yaakov Avinu does things differently. Just like Avram founded a dynasty, Yaakov founded a dynasty, right? 12 tribes. That's the modern day Jewish people. So what does Yitzchak do? He says, Ma'ani tzarech lasos, listen to this line, Ani tzarech lihiyos zeh shemamshich. My job is to be a mamshich. What's mamshich? A perpetuator. My job is to cause a hamshacha, is to create continuity. Beli tziltzulim, beli muhumos, ubeli inyanim miyusarim. Hanakuda she'avram beli Yitzchak, hayanoser episoda. Ma ose Yitzchak. So what does Yitzchak do? Let me just read one more line. He says, Yitzchak lo ro'eh chazionos. Yitzchak is not a visionary. He's not a visionary. Right? Yitzchak Avinu is not getting these grand messages from God of Lech Lecha. He's not getting that. He says, Lo yochol la'asos milchamos, lo yochol la'leches b'chol ha'olam, hu lo ish shel hekef gadol, kimo Abba Shalo, ulai hu afilu lo yochol la'asos drashos, kimo Abba Shalo. It's not Yitzchak Avinu. Yitzchak Avinu is not the worldly personality that his father was, right? Remember again, Avram Avinu was giving drashas on monotheism every single place. That wasn't Yitzchak. Aval mahu yochol la'asos, ze lahamshich. Yitzchak had a particular koach, the koach of hamshacha, the koach of continuity, of causing things to continue forward. He goes on, this is a beautiful line, he says, Zos nekudas hakim shalanu ka'am. And this ability of hamshacha, of continuity, this is the very engine that drives our people to this day. He gives a beautiful mashal. Ha'hevdel hazeh, kayem gam mechayei nisuin. So he says, Rav Steinsaltz says, let me explain to you this concept of hamshach, of continuity, is so important in marriage. He gives an example. He's using this as continuity, as a foundational building block in relationships. Look at paragraph base. This is great. Lifnei chasana, osim ra'ash. Right? What happens? A couple gets engaged. And what happens? Incredible, right? They're the center of attention for everyone and everything. Also, b'chasana, atzma, osim ra'ash, or b'shever bracha, then the chasana, okay, center of attention. Then Shavuot Brachas center of attention. Ma osim achar kach. What happens when Shavuot Brachas are over? Achar kach hofchim b'chazara lihios adam pashut shetzarich lishtof tzalachos. Rav Steinsaltz says, what happens after the chasana? You become a regular person who has to wash dishes. Right? So again, I was just the melech. I was just the king. I was the center of attention. Everything was about me. Okay, Shavuot Brachas is over. Everybody goes home. Party's over. And then what happens? You have to wash dishes. You have to wash dishes. And he says something amazing. Yesh anoshim shemagiam l'shlav shebo tzrichim lishtov tzalachos v'le'achol arucha b'shah kavua. So what happens? People sometimes come to a stage in life where they have to wash dishes. And they have other life responsibilities. Va'azhim nishparim. And they're all broken. They're all tzabrachim. They're all sad. Zug tov, listen to what he writes. Lo talui b'she'ela he'im haya chizur romanti. The metric of a successful marriage is not if you had a romantic courtship, right? The metric of a successful marriage is not, was dating wonderful? Was the chasana beautiful? Was Shavuot Brachas wonderful? Zola inyan. Zug tov, what's a good marriage? Paragraph Gimel. Zezug huzug sheyachol lasos shashigra shelo tihye tova. Good marriage means, is there continuity within the relationship? day in and day out. Is a husband good to his wife? Is a wife good to her husband? Is it a couple ultimately, again, who know that they are there for each other day in and day out, right? Anyone could throw a wonderful birthday party, right? And everyone could do a beautiful and wonderful and romantic night out. That's nice. It's nice. How every marriage should have that. But that's not, I'm sorry? Oh. That's not what makes marriage, right? At the end of the day, what makes marriage positive of Steinsaltz is the ability to create continuity day in and day out. What does and by the way, I can't tell you how incredibly important this is. And often, especially young people, I know I'm older, I could talk about young people. Young people miss this point, and they think that like marriage is supposed to be like this overwhelming whirlwind of beautiful romance, and every day you're supposed to see each other. And as soon as you set your eyes upon your husband or your wife, you hear the birds chirping, and you see everything is in technicolor, and it's fantastic, and it's wonderful. That does not happen for anyone. And if someone tells you that's their marriage, they're lying to you. No one has, unless they're on prescription medications, right? Maybe if that, otherwise, that's not marriage. And that doesn't need to be marriage. That's a fairy tale. That's not life. Life is complicated, and every day of life is full of complications. So what's good marriage? Good marriage, ultimately, again, is when there is continuity day in and day out. When there's dependability day in and day out. When you're having a rough day and a rough palm, for the Yeshiva of Torah V'das, when he used to give a chassan shmuz, he would always tell chassanim that before you leave the house for the day, it's so cute, he said, always take with you an apple. Take an apple, right? This is why. Because at the end of the day, a person comes home and they're hungry. And they're hungry, at least for most men, when you're hungry, you really do not want to talk to anyone or do anything or have anything deep. You just want to eat. And Rapam said, that's fine when you're single, but when you get married, you have to know how to walk into your home like a mensch. And you have to know how to ask your wife, how was her day, even though all you want is dinner. And you have to know how to go ahead and have conversation, even when you don't feel like it. Even so take an apple, that way on your way home, you can take away the hunger pangs, and you can walk into the home like a mensch. Good marriage is daily menschlichkeit. Good marriage is ultimately dependability. Good marriage is even when you're having a bad day, you fake it and you pretend like you're okay. Obviously, you could discuss your problems with your spouse, but that you don't dump on them and you don't take everything out on them. And you are a solid, dependable presence in good times, hamshacha. Or in other words, being a good spouse is being a Yitzchak. Yitzchak Avinu represented this midah, says Rav Steinsaltz, of hamshacha, of continuity. Yitzchak did not accomplish the same great things that his father did because he didn't need to. That wasn't his avodah. He didn't need to be a trailblazer like his father, nor did he need to be a trailblazer like his son. He needed to be someone who was strong and steady, hamshacha, to be mamshich something, to take something beautiful and then to figure out how to perpetuate it forward. Rav Steinsaltz goes on, he says, look at paragraph Dalet. He says, this is quite beautiful. He says, Anachnu maskirim es Avram v'omrim alav dvarim gidolim. Whenever we speak about Avram Avinu, right? Avinu always great things about Avram Avinu, because Avram Avinu accomplished great things. He went out in the world and fundamentally changed everything. We go on, he says, Anachnu zokrim es Shmo v'zokrim sipurim shalo. And yet, as Yitzchak, maskirim ma'at ma'od. If somebody were to tell me about Yitzchak Avinu, again, you could rattle off the events of Yitzchak's life in 30 seconds. In 30 seconds, and that's the whole thing. Aba Yitzchak asa sheyuchal lios Yaakov. See, this is incredibly important. How do you get from an Avraham? How do you get from an Avraham ultimately again to a Yaakov? How do you do that? The only way to do that is if there is stability, continuity in the middle. The only way, they say this, like you see this like in businesses as well. In business, if a business grows too quickly without solidifying its operations, ultimately it'll fail. And sometimes there's like a desire for that, right? If we're successful, let's build, let's this. There's a chachma to taking what you've built, and before we expand, solidify it. Make sure our processes are in place, our systems are in place. Make sure that we are on stable and solid footing, and then the foundation comes to be able to build it out. That was Yitzchak. Yitzchak was the stabilizer. Avram Avinu was the dreamer, the visionary, and yes, he began to create this beautiful enterprise of monotheism. And Yaakov Avinu was the one who took the family business, the monotheistic business, and took it to the next level. 12 tribes, a family, a destiny, a people. But the only way to get from an Avraham to a Yaakov is with a Yitzchak. You need a stabilizing force, or what Rav Steinsaltz called Yitzchak was a mamshich. He was someone who focused on continuity. How do I take what Abba built, what Avram Avinu built, stabilize? And that's why, by the way, it's not an accident that the Torah tells us everything we know about Yitzchak is direct repetition of Avram Avinu's life. That's by design. Because Yitzchak Avinu said, my job is not to be a mechadesh. My job is not to be an innovator. I'm not a mechadesh. I'm a mamshech. I'm not an innovator. I'm a perpetuator. I'm a solidifier. I take that which my father built and I go ahead and I solidify it so that then when my son comes along, the foundation is even more solid. And ultimately, again, my son could build on it. Rav Steinsaltz makes an amazing observation. He says, if you notice, this is at the end of the paragraph, I'll tell it to you outside. He says, if you notice that in Parshas Lech Lecha, the Torah says that Avram left with Sarai, they left Haran, and they brought with them as Hanefesh Asher Asu B'Charan. Right? Literally, again, the souls they made in Haran. And Rashi says, who is that referring to? So remember again, what does Rashi say? Rashi says that Avram and Sarah converted, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of people, right? Not hundreds of thousands, hundreds/thousands of people. Avram Avinu converted the men, converted them to monotheism. There was no Judaism. Converted them to monotheism. Sarah converted the women. So Steinsaltz says, where did everyone go? Right? I just want to point out. So the Torah says that these people went with them to Canaan. Yet by the time that Avram Avinu relocates because of famine, right? They get to, remember again the timeline. They get to Canaan, and there's Vahi Rav Ba'aretz, and where do Avram and Sarah go? Where do they go? To Mitzrayim. By the time they get to Mitzrayim, who's coming to Mitzrayim? Avram and Sarah. Where did everybody go? Where did everybody go? Rav Stein, so this is incredible. Rabbi Soloveitchik also talks about this, that they left. They left. They just, why did they leave? Why did they leave? Because Avram Avinu was the visionary builder. What didn't Avram Avinu create? A framework to sustain. See, Avram Avinu, and it wasn't his job. His job was to espouse and to ignite the world with a vision. Visions are wonderful, but they need a framework to sustain them and to perpetuate them. Without the framework, everything dissipates. Avram Avinu didn't have a framework. He didn't have a framework to hold these people. And because he didn't have a framework to hold them, just over time, whatever, the Shabbaton was over, and they just simply dissipated. Comes Yitzchak, and Chadosh Baruch Hu says Yitzchak, although we never see it explicitly communicated, it's almost as if Yitzchak just inherently understood that his avoda was to create a system, to create a framework, to be mamshech, to create continuity for his father's work, so that then the next generation, Yaakov, could build on that even a little bit more. Turn the page for just a moment. And Rav Steinsaltz really concludes over here, and this is really just beautiful. Then we'll bring it all together. He says, source number 6. And this to me was just such a transformative idea. He says, Yesh kan nekuda chashuva. Paragraph Aleph, source number 6. Rav Steinsaltz writes, there is a very important point that is being brought up over here. This is incredible. Hachayim lo benuyim al kol minei shim. Hashim lo mishanim. Life is not built on inspirational moments. That's not what it is. It's not built on inspirational moments. Mashim mishanes. Why? Because inspirational moments do not change you. Now, by the way, this is incredibly important. Inspiration is very nice. Inspiration does not create lasting change. How do we know that? We know that because look at our ancestors, right? Look at the Jews who left Egypt. There was no generation who saw greater things than our ancestors who left Egypt, right? They saw the 10 plagues, the Makos. They saw the splitting of the sea. They saw Man come down. They saw Moshe Rabbeinu come down with the Luchos. Yet, this same generation, despite all of this, built the golden calf, complained at every twist and turn, had the sin of the spies. So what's the pshat? What's the pshat? Miracles don't work. Miracles don't work, right? Miracles do not create emunah, and miracles don't affect personalistic change. Miracles are like fireworks, right? Do you ever go to a fireworks show? Okay? What do you do during a fireworks show? What do you do? Watch. Ooh, right? Very nice. You ever hear someone leaving a fireworks show saying, you know what? That was so profoundly illuminating. I'm ready to change my life. Right? No matter how good the fireworks are, no one is having like a cathartic change moment with the fireworks. It's entertaining. Miracles are entertainment. Right? Miracles are fun to watch. They're nice. It's incredible to see Kadosh Baruch Hu flex his divine muscle. It's incredible. But at the end of the day, that's not where change comes from. Rav Steinsaltz posits, he says, where does change come from? He says, I'm in source number 6, paragraph Aleph, third line in. Ma shemishana hu ha'im adam yochol lahamshich bidvarim she'ein bahem shum hislavos. Do you know where real growth comes from? Growth comes from the ability to take moments of inspiration and perpetuate them even into very uninspiring times. The secret of success in Yiddishkeit is keeping continuity even during large swaths of uninspired Judaic activity. He says, Shum davar miyuchad bidvarim she'ein lahem shum hatzaga. So do you have the ability to create, to perpetuate your personalistic inspiration even during uninspired times? Now watch, he goes on. He says, paragraph base. This is incredible. He says, Lama kal lirkol b'simchas Torah. This is incredible. This is beautiful. Why is it so easy for people to dance and be lebedig and have a good time during Simchas Torah? Why? Why? He says, Ki roktim kol hazman im svarim segurim. B'simchas Torah b'derach klal lo lomdim harbe Torah. This is so beautiful. He says, because Simchas Torah, how do you dance at the Torah? How do you dance with it? It's closed. It's closed. It is easy to have fun during Simchas Torah. Why? Because it requires no long-term commitment. Right? The sefer is closed. No one's sitting and learning during Simchas Torah. The sefer is closed. Everybody's dancing. It's fantastic. It's a beautiful moment of just like spiritual elation. He says, Magia Shavuot Sha'achari Simchas Torah, Moridim es ha'atifa me'asvarim, Poschim es ha'tik shel ha'sefer, va'achshav tzarech lahaskel lomod. The challenge becomes when Simchas Torah is over. When Simchas Yom Tovim are over, so what has to happen? That's when you get to work. That's when I open up the scroll. And sometimes when you open up the scroll, it's very uninspiring. It's unexciting. Rav Steinsaltz goes on, he says, during Simchas Torah, there's dancing, there's drinking, there's eating. It's a lot of fun. Anybody can get into it. Then the scroll is closed. It's just a moment of, it's like a YouTube short, right? Everyone loves YouTube shorts, right? Why? Because again, it's under a minute, and I feel like I'm doing something meaningful. A little above a newsflash, you're not doing anything meaningful. You're being entertained spiritually for the amount of attention span that most of us have presently. So someone is giving you, it's like, again, so instead of watching Netflix, which is, right, I'm watching YouTube shorts and I'm hearing something inspirational, which by the way, is great, it's certainly not a bad thing, but don't delude yourself for a moment thinking that that's going to affect growth, that that's somehow going to change you. And even if you hear something, wow, so inspiring, if you are a consumer of YouTube short inspirational clips, just be honest with yourself and ask yourself how much change has actually come out of all of that. By the way, it's not just YouTube shorts. In general, when we listen to things and when we are passive and when we just ingest information, rarely do we change. We might get inspired, but the incredible part about inspiration is easy come, easy go. Rav Steinsaltz posits, he says it's just like Simchas Torah. Anyone could be inspired because the scroll is closed, there's nothing it demands of me. I get to eat, I get to drink, I get to have a good time, and of course, I'm choosing to celebrate in a ruchni fashion, which is beautiful. But where does the real work occur? When Simchas Torah is over. Because when Simchas Torah is over, then I kiviyachol open up the sefer. Now I have to get to work. And that's ultimately, again, if you look at paragraph Gimel, this is incredible. He says, Chodesh mar Cheshvan, hu sog tabazos tibachinu. Hashelach Hashuva, get ready for this. This is, I think, one of the most profound pieces you'll see. Hashelach Hashuva, lo ma adam osa b'chodesh Tishrei. The shaila is not, what did you do during Tishrei? All of us had a meaningful Tishrei. How can you not have a meaningful Tishrei? It's constantly, like we said before, it's either Yom Tov or Shabbos every other day. I'm surrounded and blanketed by Kedusha at every turn. So the question of success in life is not, what did you do during Tishrei? Alamahu osa b'mar Cheshvan. The real litmus test of our spirituality is this. Mar Cheshvan. there's no Yom Tiv. There's no Yom Tiv. There's nothing else that's happening. The fundamental question during this month is, at the end of the day, Ha'im mar Cheshvan huzman shel yitzira shel avoda? Is this a month in which I'm creating new realities for myself? O shekol ma shehaya halach umeis v'alasidin shnishru lo shavadavar. Or, no, you know what, Tishrei was great, but now we're in Mar Cheshvan, and now pretty much like nothing doing. The beautiful bolts of spiritual inspiration that I had during the previous month, they're done. B'chodesh Mar Cheshvan ani shal satzmi kifatzti b'simchas Torah emani yochal lasos zeh achshav alikvitzos. During this month, I said to myself, I was so lebedig during Simchas Torah. Can I be as lebedig about Yiddishkeit now without all of the other forms of celebration? Ha'im beli rikudim, beli shtiya, ha'im ani yachal achshav lasheves v'la'avod. Zeh be'etzem hamivchan shal hachayim. The ability to be successful in Yiddishkeit comes down to one simple thing, posits Rav Steinsaltz. Can you create for yourself a meaningful and inspirational month of Cheshvan? This is our spiritual laboratory, because this is the month where I'm come armed with all of the inspiration of Tishrei. I come armed, I have it all. Can I now go ahead and make it work for me during this month? And amazing enough, so how do I do that? And now we bring these two things together, because Cheshvan is the month where we work on our ability to be a Yitzchak. What was the greatness? Yitzchak is Cheshvan, Cheshvan is Yitzchak. You ever wonder about Yiddishkeit, right? If I were to ask you, what's one of the most frustrating things about Judaism? What would you say? It's a safe space, you could say it, right? What's one of the most frustrating things about Judaism? Okay, no one has any frustrations. Good. One of the most frustrating things about Yiddishkeit, for many, is the repetitive nature of it, right? Just a moment, right? We daven 3 times a day. Right? I'll ask you, do you know anyone who davens with complete kavanah 3 times a day? And if you say yes, you're lying, right? No one davens. It's like, well, almost seems like an exercise in futility. What does that mean? So here, I have to daven 3 times a day, 3 Shmona Esreis, 3 times a day, Shachris Mincha Ma'ariv, and I know out of the gate, I'm not getting them all with kavanah. On a personal level, if I get one of my tefillas, one Shmona Esrei with kavanah throughout the day, that's a win. That's a win, because there are many days where all 3 of them are mediocre at best. I'm checking a box. So why? And there's a lot in Yiddishkeit like this. Same thing like brachas. I'd love to be able to say that I make all of my brachas with proper kavanah. I don't, right? Benching. When was the last time you had an inspirational benching during the week? I would say on Shabbos also, but anytime. But yet, these are demands that are put upon us with such rigor. I think to myself, like, wouldn't it be better? Give me like 1 tefillah a day. 1 tefillah a day. And I could get that. So I want to tell you something, that I think the goal is not to daven with kavanah 3 times a day. That is not the goal. I think a lot of times in Yiddishkeit, we create unrealistic expectations of ourselves. The goal is to continue to do the things I'm supposed to do day in and day out. The goal is to create spiritual continuity. Chazal knew I wasn't going to have kavanah every single Shmona Esrei. Just like I'm not going to have kavanah every single bracha. That was never the goal. Maybe some people could do that, but for most of us, that's never the goal. What's the goal? The goal is to be a Yitzchak. The goal is hamshacha, to be mamshich. Continuity. Showing up day in and day out, making these spiritual activities part of my activities of daily living. That's the godless of it. You know, someone mentioned to me the other day that one of the Kabbalists they took upon themselves during Tishrei was to say Kriya Shema Lamita. Like the whole Kriya Shema Lamita, not just Shema, but like the whole Kriya Shema Lamita. And they came to me and said, like, I do it, like I have to tell you, like, I rush through it, like I'm half asleep. I don't know, like, what's the point? What's the point? And I said, who said that the obligation of Kriya Shema Lamita is with Kavanah? Who said that it's with Kavanah, right? Maybe the goal ultimately just is that a Yid should realize that before you go to sleep with Kedusha. The same way that when you wake up in the morning, you say Moda'ani because you wake up with Kedusha, go to sleep with Kedusha. Who said anything about kavanah? Who said anything about specific intent? Maybe it's just about hamshacha, continuity, showing up, doing things day in and day out, because at the end of the day, that is the sign of commitment to a relationship. And this is true, by the way, in any relationship. Any relationship. Think about this, right? We could use marriage just as an example because it's always the easiest example, right? In a marriage, there are things that I am obligated to do day in and day out, and I do not like doing them. I don't like taking out the garbage. I really don't like it. I don't like it. Especially we have like a family of raccoons that has chosen to like take up residence, right? And Baruch Hashem, I say like it's good because V'racham al kol ma'asav. Somebody said pour bleach. I said like, you know what? If somebody else could benefit from my garbage, so what's the big deal, right? So fine, but like I don't enjoy doing it, but I do it. I'm not going to say like I do it with a smile on my face. I don't, but I do it. Why? Because relationship is about showing up and doing what is upon you, even if you don't like it. That's Yitzchak. Not that Yitzchak didn't like it, but that's the godless of Yitzchak. Yitzchak is like continuity, hamshacha. Because if I create hamshacha, continuity in my life, then first of all, for myself, I create a solid foundation upon which I can build. And also for my children, I create a solid foundation upon which I can build. But if I am not a Yitzchak personality, if I don't create continuity, then what do I expect my kids to build on? If I don't create continuity, then what do I expect myself to build on? If there's no solid foundation that I'm creating for me, then how do I build upon that going forward? And so it turns out, Rav Steinzal says, and it's such a beautiful idea, that month of Cheshvan is the month of Yitzchak Avinu. And it stands in such contradistinction to Tishrei. It's almost as if like Tishrei is the month of like Avram and Yaakov, right? Tishrei is the month where like you have vision and you're dreaming, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that and all these fantastic things. And that's great. And I need a month like that. And then comes Cheshvan, and Cheshvan is just about plugging away day after day after day. And I know this sounds a little bit strange because I think we're often conditioned to think that Yiddishkeit is supposed to be inspiring, right? And if it's not inspiring, I'm doing something wrong. Yiddishkeit is inspiring, but chances are it's not inspiring all of the time. And by the way, that's because Yiddishkeit is a relationship. Think about this. No child always loves their parents. No spouse is always passionately in love with their significant other, right? There are times that it's more intense, times that it's less intense. That's the way relationships are. They wax and they wane. There are peaks and valleys. And in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is what we call Yiddishkeit, there are times of incredible and beautiful and passionate inspiration. Those are like Avram and Yaakov moments. And then there are times where maybe I'm not feeling it, but I still plug away. And that's the metric of success. What do you do in your moments of Yiddishkeit when you are not inspired? When you are not fully on? What do? Do you just say, I'm not feeling it, and kind of just walk away until you do feel it again? Or say, no, this is Yitzchak. This is Cheshvan. It's all about plugging away. And by the way, I've said before, often the path to inspiration is paved with much arduous, uninspired activity. People want inspiration as if it's something that you could ingest, like inspire me. If you want inspiration, which is there waiting for all of us, you have to be willing to engage in a significant amount of uninspired activity. And then one day, if you keep plugging away, if you're a Yitzchak Jew, if you're a Cheshvan Jew, the inspiration comes. But the success of our Yiddishkeit, the beauty of our Yiddishkeit, the actualization of our Yiddishkeit, doesn't come ultimately from the moments of inspiration. It comes from knowing that I'm a Yitzchak Cheshvan Jew, and I'm showing up day after day after day. You know, I'll end up. Someone once asked Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik said that. He said that we live in an age of such incredible scholarship, and he said, if you would ask a young woman today, let's say who went through the Beis Yaakov system, day school system, maybe goes to Heritage afterwards, like, why do you like Shabbos candles? What are Shabbos candles? So what's the answer? Right? Because again, Zachar, Shamar, Sari, Mina, Shabbos candles in her tent, all these different kind of beautiful things. Aaron Soloveitchik said, if you would have asked a woman 2 generations ago, generation ago. Why do you light Shabbos candles? What would she have answered? My mother did it. My mother did it. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik calls that the mimetic tradition. That there's something beautiful about that. And he says, scholarship is beautiful, but there's also something beautiful in just doing things because this is what we do. This is what we do. I understand it. I don't understand it. It inspires. It doesn't inspire. I'm in a relationship with the divine. I understand what that means to be in a relationship with God. And Hakadosh Baruch Hu says, I love you, and I want to have this relationship. But like any relationships, there are things that have to occur day in and day out. Some of them you're going to like. Some of them you're not going to like. Some you're going to understand. Some you're not going to understand. Some will inspire you, and some will lead you scratching and wondering, why do I need to do this? But that's what relationship is. When you love someone, you're willing to do for them what they need, even if you don't understand why it has to be done. That's a Yitzchak Avinu. That's Hamshacha. That's taking activities of day-to-day life and just keep going, keep plugging away, keep doing, keep showing up. It is inspiring, it's not inspiring, but one thing is clear. If I find the courage ultimately to be a Yitzchak, and if I find the courage to power my way through a Cheshvan, remember what comes after Cheshvan? What comes after Cheshvan? Kislev. What's Kislev? Kislev is the month of light. Kislev is the month, ultimately, again, like the Maharal says, Chanukah is 8 days. 8 is Lamala Min HaTava. 8 is supernatural. If you're willing to put in the work during Cheshvan, you're willing to keep showing up day after day, and you're willing to keep committed to the relationship and to do the things that the relationship demands, even when I'm not so excited about them, you'll get to your Kislev. Just like only because of a Yitzchak did we get to a Yaakov. So much of our Yiddishkeit is about solidifying, bolstering our foundational identity. And that is done through repetition. That is done through hamshacha, through continuity. That is done through reinforcing certain core behaviors over and over and over again. And while that does not sound exciting and may not sound particularly inspiring, if you keep up being a Yitzchak, if you keep up through Cheshvan, ultimately you get to Kislev. The inspiration comes, but only to those who are willing to put in the day-to-day hamshacha continuous work. Klal Yisrael needed an Avram and needed a Yaakov. But the only way we got from the first patriarch to the last of the patriarchs was because of Yitzchak. Yitzchak is that great stabilizer. Yitzchak is that great solidifier. Yitzchak is that great bridge. And it was true for the patriarchs, and it's true for us as well. Tishrei is the month of Avram Avinu, incredible inspiration. And Kislev is the month of Yaakov Avinu, great light. But in order to get between one and the next, we have to be a Yitzchak. We have to be Cheshvan Jews. Cheshvan Baruch Hu should just give us the siyata d'shmaya to continue showing up, to continue doing, to continue working. And even in those moments when I feel maybe a little bit uninspired and wonder like, what am I doing and why am I doing this? I don't even feel anything about it. Recognize we're part of the most beautiful relationship that exists in the universe, a relationship with Hashem. And what he tells us is just keep showing up, just keep doing. Because if the foundation is strong, then we could build a beautiful edifice of inspiration above it in Yiras Hashem, which will illuminate our lives, the weeks and the months ahead. We'll stop over here for today. Shkoyach, everyone. If you are not yet part of the WhatsApp group, the QR code is on the sheet. That way, normally, we put the shir is on in Yiras Hashem for the foreseeable future. But should there be a change, any of those changes will be communicated through that WhatsApp group. Have a wonderful day. What happens? We'll get to that. Then if you, by the way, if you look at the months, they're actually similar. They're peaks and valleys, each of them. And if you look at it, there's almost like a. That is correct. So Teves is like a little bit of it. Correct. And they go up to Adar, what generally changes.
Is your camera off of it?
Yes.
Okay, you know what I was just thinking? That was fantastic. I'm so glad I could come. I should put this in my work calendar. This is my work meeting at 10:30.